everybody. So my name is Brian Huff, and thanks for coming to COM 209. This is how to become a full stack developer in the cloud, and it's through my process of migrating my company from Google Cloud to AWS. So, taking a talk, yeah. There we go, okay, cool. Better? Okay, cool, there we go, thanks. So, we're going to be going through 5 core things through this talk, and by the end of it, I hope you get at least one of these and they're really valuable for you. So, just to get a show of hands first, how many of you would consider yourself to be a developer or a builder of some sort? All right, there we go, okay, cool. How many front-end developers? Any front-end people? All right, cool. How many cloud DevOps people? All right, a lot of people. How many people just do back-end? All right, we've got the backend people. And then how many people do full stack and they ship apps live? All right, okay, cool. So we got a good range of skills here. So we're gonna go through all 5 of those core areas, and then by the end of this, I'm gonna hope to help illuminate a roadmap for anybody that wants to build apps, but maybe doesn't know how to get started. So it's important to note just a little bit about me. I couldn't code 2 years ago. So this, if it's possible for me, it's possible for anybody here. So I'm a Web 2 and a Web 3 developer. I really vibe between cloud and blockchain. I'm a software engineer at a company called The Capital, and I'm also an AWS community builder. So any community builders here? All right. And I also run a podcast called The Tech Stack Playbook, and I have done a lot of hackathons, and that's kind of how I got into development. So my developer roadmap might look a little bit different than yours. I got started at a hackathon back in 2019. That was when I learned what React was. I didn't know what NPM was. I didn't know what JavaScript was at all. I learned from a mentor there, and it was just so helpful for me. I got really involved in the open source community, and then I became an AWS community builder, which has been a hugely helpful program for me, building my career. I joined The Capital. This was actually, to be honest, my first real dev job as a front-end developer. And then I joined Developer DAO afterwards. The vibe between cloud and blockchain really helped me a lot. And I also then became a full stack developer at The Capital. And that was where I was really taking my front end and then making it functional. Right. So I like to think of this as a chart of how much do you want to go down the tech rabbit hole to actually build an app. So when I was doing design, say like 10% down the rabbit hole. I did front end, another 10%. You keep going down the path until your boss tells you to build a full stack feature and a whole platform, and you've never done that before. That's when you're really going to go down the tech rabbit hole, and you're going to find out a lot about yourself in terms of what you can do. So I made this TikTok a year ago, and it is as relevant then as it is now. Basically, you read your TechCrunch articles, you saw that your friend raised, $50 million. That's going to be you tomorrow. And then it's like, I have this idea, I want to go build an app. You find out that there's about 12 things that you have to do or you have to learn, and you don't know how to do any of them. That was me, and I had never done any of these things before, and I found out that authentication and authorization are 2 totally different things, believe it or not. Serverless, front-end, back-end, DevOps, API servers, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you really do have to know. So I just thought that was kind of funny because even looking back on it, it's as relevant then as it is now. So building an app is a lot of work, right? We're not going to sugarcoat that. And we're not going to say, we're going to build, Facebook in a weekend. That's not real. But anything worth doing in life is worth doing with purpose. And that's what I firmly believe. So we're going to build an application right here through slides, through a 4-step process. And by the end of this will hopefully help you learn how to launch apps on the cloud. So let's take the job of a front-end developer. This was my first role, and this was basically my intro to tech. So it's day 1, your boss brings you a Figma wireframe. If you don't know Figma, it's just a wireframing tool. It's kind of like Photoshop for apps. I see some head nods, so we like Figma. So it's in a framework that you don't know yet. There's complex styles that aren't really well defined, and it's confusing. There's a production build. You might have something at your company that you don't have access to. And there's no solution architecture diagram yet. That's where you come in, right? You're the developer. So that was me scratching my head, and I was thinking, did I miss something? Like, where's the roadmap here? So I kind of had to build this roadmap as I went along. I was able to take our version 1, which runs on Angular on Google Firebase, and then refactor that into our V2, which runs on AWS, and it's with React. We're going to be moving it to Next.js. You'll see migrations are a common pattern with me, so we try to make things better, so it's going to be with Next in a little bit. But it's faster, It's much more responsive, it's much more scalable, and it has a lot of cool stuff. So if you've never coded with Angular, I don't say that I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not saying that. Angular is really hard because you have TypeScript in there, so that's hard type JavaScript. There's modules, there's components, there's a lot of stuff. So you basically need to like learn a framework and get really good at it. So I wasn't really that familiar with Angular at all. And I kind of had to learn about how CSS is the styling, HTML is the framework. You have JavaScript that maybe is doing functions, but I wasn't even there yet, I was just doing front end. And where the plot thickens a little bit more is that there's all these configuration files, there's all these static files, there's all these app assets that you have to make, all these components, and it's all in this. There's tons of files. It was so overwhelming for me when I first started, and I moved along. I was learning Angular, I was building the front end, but it was painful, let me tell you. So we start off really great. I'm learning Angular, I'm learning all of these things. And then we start hitting some roadblocks. But it's not a skills issue, it's more of a framework issue. We find out that Firebase isn't able to service the feed that we want to have. So we want to have personalized feeds. So when you follow somebody, it's a personalized feed of those person's posts. We want to do recommendation engine. We want to maybe do a graph database. There's a lot of stuff that we want to be able to do, and Firebase just isn't cutting it at the end of the day. And this is not a knock to Firebase. Firebase is a great database. It's just what our team wanted to do. The container was containerizing us. We weren't able to scale. So it's 7 months in, I've built the front end in Angular. I now go to my tech lead and I go, hey, we already are, kind of moving towards AWS. My boss had already adopted AWS as we want to move towards this, but there's stuff that Firebase can't do. So we're moving to AWS. I go, Angular can't really do a lot of the stuff that we want to do. There's not a lot of documentation about Angular with AWS, much more about React and JavaScript. So my tech lead, it just took a call, and he was like, I trust you, Ryan, like, let's go with that. My boss took a lot more convincing, because he was seeing this as, wait, what was the last 7 months doing? I thought we had this framework. And I said, no, you have to trust me. This is gonna be so much better for us in the long run, like, you have to trust me. And I'm a new employee, so I had to take a lot of convincing. It took not one call, it took a few more calls. But I was able to get the buy-in from it, because there's less technical debt at the end of the day. When you build with a framework that most developers know, it's easier to use. So, an introduction to React. Think of it as like Lego blocks for your code. You're gonna basically be putting blocks inside of blocks, pages become blocks, and then that's how your app runs. It's a DOM-based framework, and it basically can do the same as Angular, but it's a lot easier to use in my opinion. So, we have your dependencies, you have your building blocks as code, your HTML, CSS, JavaScript. AWS, as you'll see in a little bit, it fits right in there at the top, and then you have your static files, you have your app source, your app components, and your configuration. So it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to use. So when we were building our tech stack, we're using all of these different frameworks, and when you start building an application, you might just be focusing on one side. I had to learn all of these. So React is what the client sees, that's what your users are gonna see. GraphQL is the glue between your database, your AWS things, and then your users, sort of deciding what users can and can't do. You have Node.js, which I'll get into a little bit, but that's running server-side code in Lambda. JavaScript, sort of interspersed throughout, client-side, backend. Also, JSON is the data structure of choice. When you get your JWT token back, JSON will be servicing products or posts or user data. And then styled components. Big shout out to style components. I'm a huge fan of the style framework. It's really great. Also, Tailwind is really great if you're looking for CSS. I see some nods on Tailwind CSS, okay? But I really like style components, but that's because I'm really customized with the capital of CSS. So that's how I was trained. So I like style components. So we did our front end. We have our buttons. We have our pages. Now we want to make it do some things. But we can't just make it do things. We have to think about it a little bit. So an ethos that I've been thinking about a lot over the past 7-8 months is think thrice, architect twice, code once. So what do you actually need to build this application? Don't start throwing in 50, 100 AWS services or third parties, dependencies, all that type of stuff. Think of like, what are the 4 things or the 5 things that any app needs? So for us, it was logging in, logging out. It was hosting a domain, having users have data, and then a list of ownables. So this was our first workflow frame, and this was before we started architecting things. So this was supposed to be super basic, and not supposed to be a masterpiece. It shouldn't look smart. it should look functional. So that's what we did here. So when we want to actually build on the cloud, right, we have our idea of our app, but how do we actually get started? Well, funny enough, AWS has a framework called Amplify, and this is going to deconstruct and abstract all of the complexity of cloud away from you. So as soon as you install the CLI with the first command, you'll do a configure and then an initialize or an init. And then what you're going to do is basically create an IAM profile for you to connect to your AWS account, and then you're also going to initialize Amplify as a project for your repository. So when we went back on the React project where I said that Amplify folder sits at the top, it's going to provision this AWS exports file for your React application, and that's where it's going to then connect your code to AWS. So it's super easy to just get started. Once we do Amplify push, now that's in the cloud in our AWS region. I don't know if you deploy in US region 1, but that's where I deploy a lot of my stuff. So that's what it's going to look like. But there's other stuff that I'm sure you can see. We're going to fill that in a little bit. So we want to add an authentication system, right? Users need to be able to log in and log out. So there's sort of 3 flavors of authentication. You can do email password, you can do federation, you do custom integration with OpenID Connect. So I like just the default settings. We like defaults. Defaults make it easy. So we'll do Amplify add off. We'll configure that. We'll go through a flow in the CLI, and then that'll provision Cognito for us. We'll do Amplify push. And then now Cognito is able to connect our Amplify project to users in the cloud. So let's say that we wanted to get a little bit fancier. We want to do like sign in with Google or sign in with Twitter, those other types of things. So we can provision and update to the authentication with Amplify add off. We can then modify its attributes and then allow users to have multiple ways to log in. We'll do Amplify update off, we'll do push, and then now users could maybe route to Google OAuth or email depending on what they choose when they sign up. So now we want to add an API, right? Users need to be able to do stuff. So it's as easy as Amplify add API. I like GraphQL. It's a really great framework. A ton of enterprise companies use it. And once you configure that out, we'll connect it to our Amazon Cognito user pool. We'll do, username, email, and then we'll be able to then start writing our API. So that's where it's going to just create a basic foundation. They have a template for GraphQL, and then you'll be able to start using some types. So just to get a little bit of a breakdown into GraphQL, think of it where like everything is a type, and then types have attributes, which are called scalar types. So when you create a type called the thing, you can add @modal to it. That's going to connect your thing to DynamoDB and create a database table for that. We can then add searchable, so that Elastic OpenSearch, they just rechanged it, so it's Amazon OpenSearch service. That's where you're going to be able to then search from your client side your database. We can then also add auth to give auth permissions, so maybe public access, but they can't write. Maybe private, so users can see other people's posts, maybe update them, maybe like a post, but they can't own it. And then the owner field is for people that actually created the object. So you created the thing, only you can modify and edit it or create it. So then we'll add some, some attributes, maybe a name, some content. We can do also connecting other types together. And then once we push that to the cloud, that's where AppSync is now connected to DynamoDB with OpenSearch service. And now you're able to have users log in, get access to the things that they're supposed to get access to, and also search for those things. So it's pretty cool, and we're building this pretty fast. So now we want to add storage. This is photos, media, videos, kind of the heavy data types. So when we create buckets, it's easy as Amplify add storage. It's going to provision basically 3 different types of buckets for you. It's going to be basically, you're kind of going to just use public and private, but that's where you're going to be able to then allow users to maybe update buckets. So if they wanted to change their profile picture, they'd be able to do that. And then we push that to the cloud, and now you can connect your database to S3, to AppSync, to this. So now we're sort of seeing that we're scaling out our needs for our users based upon services. So now we want to add this on a URL, right? We want people to be able to see this. So Amplify is a managed service for CI/CD pipelines. So let's say that you configure your code in GitHub. You could be able to then push to the prod branch. Amplify will go through its whole 4-phase build, and then it'll basically find errors or issues in production. It's kind of like hard typing for your CI/CD pipeline. And then it's going to create a URL like that. So it'll be, production branch dot some sort of characters dot amplifyapp.com. So that is literally how you could just create your app and then serve it to users. So this is really great for demoing, really great for testing. It's really great also just to see how an app would look, not on localhost. So then Now we have an app that's live. So GitHub push, now it's running Amplify, and now our app is able to be serviced by users. So now users can log in, get access to API, database, all this types of stuff. So now we want to add some secure lambdas because we want to be a little fancy, right? We want to be really secure and we want to do it correctly. So we can do Amplify add function. We can then create different types of lambdas. Something that I've actually been doing a lot over the last like 3 months is with Lambda triggers. So you can create DynamoDB streams that then do Lambda commands. So let's say that a user logs in. That would be like a cognito close authentication. So as soon as a user logs in, fetch their data. Or a user makes a follow request, then update user data to say like they followed one person and that person is being followed by one person. So that's really where you can use Node.js. Again, I like JavaScript, so we're going to use JavaScript. And then you configure the type of the function. And then you can also, this is actually a really cool thing that you can do. So you can create queries that then interface with your Lambda function. So it can have the same types of things as the other GraphQL schema that we just showed. They can have their own authorization rules. It can go to a database if you wanted to. And then you have your inputs. So it works just like any other type in GraphQL. So now we just pushed it, and something that you could do was you could have SES, you could have email campaigns, you could use Stripe for payment, securely, storing financial data. So this is where, you don't want to do this client side because there's a lot of risks involved with users can, exploit that type of stuff. So you can do it securely in the backend with Lambda, and then you just get a response back once the compute compiles. And because we're at AWS, we like to be data-driven, right? So we can add Kinesis onto our application, and then that's where we can then create smart data, so then tracking analytics, so views, impressions, all that good stuff. We do Amplify push, and then we can have analytics connected to our build throughout the whole thing. So, drum roll, what do we have? Let's find out. So we have this is like a 10,000 foot view of a cloud architecture, but this is really how an app would be servicing. Users log in with Cognito, there's an API, there's a database at 3, Lambda is running in the background at 4, data analytics at 5, and then Amplify hosting our URL so that our users can access it. So this is all running in the cloud, and then the users only see the app that you show them. So now the backend developer has the role of, and this was a lot, right? This was a lot of cloud stuff. Now the backend developer has to make it all work, because if it can't work, that's not so fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Amplify SDK that connects our front end to our back end. And when we have a mutation, so on the left, what we can do is with our authorization rules that we configured in GraphQL, a user could create a thing. They have an input, so like if you use React, you might have like use state. So enter a username, enter, whatever, like a number. And then you create that thing. We have the auth mode as Amazon Cognito user pools. And then we have a try catch around that, and then users are able to then do that. We can also do queries, so that's like listing or getting an item, and then also storage. So the Amplify SDK makes it really easy to use the AWS services and also interface it client-side for your users directly. So what we're able to do was take basically a fully functional application, add in an editor, so that's in the top left, so users are able to write articles. This all stores in S3 and DynamoDB, and then users can also then see their drafts and their articles before they're published, so that's GraphQL types. And then users also can create profiles, and they also have a personalized feed. So all of this stuff, when I say it's possible, it really is possible. You can learn full stack development. It might take a while to do, but you'll get there, I promise you. You just might need to spend a lot of time on Stack Overflow, going on Medium, Dev.to, a lot of blogs, a lot of debugging, but you'll get there. So I would say this is probably one of the best takeaway slides that I hope that you all take with you. That kind of going back to the TikTok video that we had in the beginning, apps have a lot of stuff. Developers have to do a lot of things. But if there's not like 50 things, right? If there was like 10 things that you wanted to focus on, it's these. So we need an API. We need a glue between our database and our users. And that's going to be how users can have authorization rules. And that's how users, I don't get access to, Joey's content and Joey's content doesn't get access to me. Or I don't get access to Sally's content, Sally can't get access to my content. So that's where the API comes in. Authentication, that's Cognito. So that's how users log in, log out. We have authorization. So Sally is Sally, I am Brian, Joe is Joe. And that's how authentication and authorization can sort of help with the API to keep your users secure and their data secure. we're gonna need a code base. We need to store the code somewhere, right? We're gonna have a database. I like DynamoDB, but there's other relational databases, there's other things that you can configure for your users, but DynamoDB is great. We need hosting. We need to have a URL for our users to be able to access their content. So the URL that Amplify provisions, you can also add your own custom domain, so that's really great. I was actually doing that 20 minutes before my flight to Vegas, so I did that with Route 53, I did a subdomain, so it's new.thecapital.io, and we're able to do it. Sometimes it might take 24 hours, but we're able to do it in 20 minutes. So no guarantees if you can do it, but I was able to do it somehow. Security, we want to keep users secure. So we were talking about Lambda earlier. Lambda functions help keep secure our functions and our users' data private. We also add storage. We want to have users be able to save profile pictures, maybe videos, maybe posts have photos. So that's where the storage element comes in with S3. Virtual machine or environment, something to run your code. Something that's kind of interesting between Web 2 and Web 3. You know, you might be deploying something on Ethereum, otherwise you might be deploying something on AWS. Both are virtual machines, both run compute, and that's how you're able to service data and users and access. And then you probably need like some sort of payment processor. So something to take money, imagine like you might have a premium subscription or users are paying users for something. So that's where the payment processor comes in. So kind of going back to the whole TikTok approach, there's gonna be a lot of stuff you have to know. But if there's like 10 things you have to know, it's this. Anything else is kind of additional, and a lot of this stuff can be abstracted with something like Amplify. And that's why I really like this framework, because it makes AWS really accessible. What I found though is that you will have to extend certain services. You might need to expand what Amplify can traditionally do in its sandbox environment. So that shouldn't scare you. There's SAM, there's CDK. I haven't really used those actually for the Capital, but I know people that have, and those are really great. There's a ton of sessions on CDK recently, so I highly recommend you going to check those out. So there's ways to make the Amplify framework work for you, but the main thing is to like get the core base down of what you want. You can always make things hundreds of levels more complex than it needs to be, but like baseline, what does your app need to do? And these are the 10 things that if you can do those, you have an app that you can go to market with. So, okay, we covered like quite a lot. I think it was like around like 20, 25 minutes. So we did a lot of stuff. So just to kind of cover off what we talked about. So we went from front end to DevOps and cloud to back end to full stack. So that's kind of the lens that I approach. Some people actually go in like complete reverse. They might do back end first and then create a front end. Personally, I'm kind of bullish on the front end approach because at the end of the day, like the back end is the back end, but you still need to have users interacting with it. There's some, you know, like if you have like compute, it just needs to run. It doesn't really matter. But if you have a UI, it needs to look good. At least my boss thinks so. So it needs to look good. Then the DevOps in the cloud is working in the background, and then you have your backend functions that can compile everything else. We also went through GraphQL. Highly recommend that for working with APIs. AppSync is a really great kind of like handshake between GraphQL and the API. We also learned how to deploy services with the CLI. So it's literally as simple as Amplify, you know, add or Amplify configure, then Amplify push, and then that's going right to the cloud. Also, if you are doing Amplify push, make sure that you like are on internet and that you keep it running for a while. It takes around like 10 minutes to compile all of the CloudFormation script, so just make sure that you give it some time, but it's still working. And then we also talked about how to interact with our API through queries, mutations, and updates. So this is kind of a lot, right? I definitely hope, I'm gonna have, I'll show you on the next slide, but I have my slides on my GitHub, and I hope that you go back to this type of reference point. This is this type of information that I wish I had when I started. I kind of had to like do a lot of Googling and a lot of reading the documentation over and over again. But that's kind of where like if you focus on those 10 things, front end, DevOps, cloud, back end, full stack, it all makes sense at a certain point. You just gotta be patient and give yourself some time. But if you ever are building anything, like please tweet at me at BrianHHup. I'd love to see what you all are building. I'm very responsive on Twitter. Maybe after reInvent, I'll be a little more on Twitter. But yeah, please let me know what you all are building. I'd love to like, if you ever have any questions, like feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear it. Love to be able to support what you're working on. So I'm gonna say thank you for attending my dev chat. And I hope that this is really helpful for you. Those are my social handles, and yeah, please feel free to reach out. And I definitely would say don't feel intimidated to build something. A lot of times, you know, you think that with scale you can't really build anything, but I'm just saying, like, if I can learn how to code in like 2 years, I'm sure you could do it faster. I was non-technical before this, so I was gonna say if it's possible for me, it's definitely possible for you too. So I hope this inspires you to build the app of your dreams, and then maybe launch the next, you know, Fortune 500 company, or who knows, maybe a nonprofit that can actually impact a lot of communities around the world. So I hope this is helpful for you, and thank you for coming to my dev chat.